being able to create that safe space for your team. How do you create that safe space? As a leader, this is our responsibility. How are we going to be the witness for people's learning? One experience that I've had when I was growing up, like this is a memory from, when I was really young, no more than elementary school, but it really stuck with me. I was flying on a plane, and it was the first time I was not sitting next to my parents. And there was a meal served. You know how on airplanes when they serve meals, there's so much packaging, etc. Like if you're a little kid, you don't know what to do with this packaging. It's really hard to handle and maneuver that, right? And so there was this girl who was just a few years older than me sitting next to me, and she saw me struggling with this, right? She was sort of this really nice presence who helped me with that. And then she showed me how she was taking some of those things and, packing it away for me. But she created the space for me where first time I was doing this and I was learning, right? And it's not difficult. I was a smart kid. I could figure this out. But this memory really stayed with me that she was a witness for my learning who created this safe space. And I was thinking about how, as leaders, right? Our teams are constantly solving puzzles, and we have to create the safe space where it's not even about embracing failure. Like I was thinking about how, in the business world, first of all, we set goals and then we create all these artificial mantras like you have to embrace failure, fail fast, learn fast. And it's such bullshit, right? Because think about when you're solving a Rubik's Cube, you don't try your first attempt and go like, oh, that was a failure, but I'm going to embrace failure. Like you don't even think in those terms. You just try something and you go like, oh yeah, what did I learn from that? And then like you just do that so intuitively. You don't even think of the words failure.
Welcome to another episode of the Being and Leading podcast, a podcast where I strive to interview leaders who lead consciously in alignment with their true selves and when in their with their values. And I strive to talk with inspiring people who build authentic relationships and create success rooted in what truly matters to them. And I hope to and bring you stories of leadership that comes from within, from heart, from integrity, and from awareness. And I think my guest tonight is really a true example of what I've just said. I'm really honored to welcome Radhika Dutt, who is a author, speaker, and a consultant, and I think has a rich multi-potentialist history that I think we will discover tonight. So I'm really, really glad that we somehow connected, and I'm really, really curious about where this interview is going to take us.
Thanks so much for having me on. And I'm so excited to be here. On our introductory call, we were supposed to talk for half an hour. It went on for more than an hour. We just couldn't stop. So I've been really excited for this conversation for a while.
Mm. So I normally start these podcasts with asking you, what are some words that you describe yourself with, that you would, kind of want people to know you by?
Oh, I won't give you the bullshit interview version of this.
Thank you.
But I remember this exercise, back in my early career days, and I never liked it. But let's take a crack at this. And maybe it's words that have been used to describe me. One of my earliest bosses, who didn't like me at the time, but I think what he said really stuck with me. His words were, "You're gentle but tenacious." I
Ah.
think that is that is very true. And I think the one other word that comes to me is authentic. This is something that is really meaningful for me. I think especially, I will say, in the last just 2 years, I feel like even when I'm on stage, I'm able to be more of exactly who I am. That
Mm.
I've realized that for me to truly be myself and feel like I get energy from conversations, I have to be able to be completely myself. And I've been able to do that increasingly in the last 2 years.
Mm. It's interesting. A friend of mine described me as gently uncompromising, so I can see why we resonate. Yeah.
I
And
love that.
and you said that you've been increasingly able to be more authentic, and I'm authenticity is always a journey because there are always parts of us that we are still discovering, that we still feel that. And maybe to start it, what was for you maybe the most hidden or the most difficult to reach in order to feel like your authenticity is expressed?
Mm. So I think to answer this, I have to share a little bit of my background, which is that, I grew up in India till I was 12 and then moved to South Africa. And when I moved to South Africa, that was 1991, which was just after apartheid laws were abolished. And 1995 was when I left South Africa, and that was right after the first democratic elections. And the one other thing I'll say is even when I lived in India, I'm from the north, but lived in the south. So, which means this is like someone who is German living in France, that you're never ever living in a place where you truly belong. So that has been my case ever since, I was little. For all my conscious memory, I've never lived in a place where I belonged. And the second thing is moving to South Africa in the apartheid era. I had to constantly prove myself. Nothing was ever enough. And it's not just a color of skin, it's also being an immigrant. You never have a group that you belong within. And so you asked the question about what makes one authentic and able to embrace themselves. When you've always felt like you don't belong and then you're always proving yourself, I think you haven't fully learned how to embrace all of you. What you keep noticing is all of your flaws and not necessarily what you do well.
Mm.
I remember, when my first book, when I got a book deal, and I remember when it was published, like that day when I got the box of books and it was the official publishing day, my kids were so excited for me. They were sort of jumping around the house saying, how exciting for you. And, I noticed how I was able to celebrate that day, but the next day was sort of moving on and it was the next thing that I was moving on to. And even my kids said to me, do you realize like maybe you should celebrate for longer? And I was like, yeah, that's very true. So I think that's what gets sort of set up in you based on your upbringing, or at least that's what's been set up in me because of my upbringing. And authenticity and embracing oneself has been about unpacking all of that and really has happened in the last year. And as I've gotten more confident, then at some point it's the realization that no matter kind of all that I've accomplished, what else is there? And it's unpacking all of this upbringing that has helped me embrace more of myself, that then makes me feel like, I don't have anything to prove, that I can truly be myself in every conversation.
Mm, mm. And I really like the richness of your experience. And I think it's living at that edge that always gives us the experience um, of what's, truly difference and what's that we have commonalities even in different ethnicities, in different um, countries. And I think I don't share the exact same range in terms of the path, but I know how it is to live at that edge. And also how it's very hard to accept differences as something that's great. And what I'm hearing is that that's maybe something that's been happening for you in this journey is accepting your difference not as something wrong, but as something great and beautiful and useful.
That's interesting. I hadn't necessarily thought about it even as accepting differences.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's fascinating. Like I think living in South Africa, that's true, that the differences are constantly noticeable. And no, you don't feel good about those differences at all. You're right. Um, but I think the authenticity comes from, um, hmm, is it embracing differences and differences are good? I have to think about it and reflect on that more. I don't know. I say that because I feel like sometimes it's about being able to see all of yourself, what shaped you. I think it's more of that for me. It's really understanding even what shaped you, whether differences are good or bad, etc. Like even understanding what is shaped you, or like this constant drive that maybe it comes from a toxic place. It's like when you start to see that, the spell is broken, and
Yes.
that you're no longer about those achievements, that I am more than just the cumulative set of achievements, that
Mm.
I can embrace who I am just for being me. I think that part comes both from meditation and the unpacking. It's not so much about differences being good or bad, I guess.
I love that. I love the part where you said that the spell is broken. And if you could, and because this is being and leading, and the being come first, and then the leading is informed from our being, I wonder um, what happened for you once the spell was broken, and how do you think that impacts your current leadership?
Mm. I think for me, with the spell being broken, like given that I'm not feeling like I have something to prove, it makes me focus on the interpersonal relationship a lot more. And the second thing is you approach it with more curiosity.
Mm.
And one thing that I observe in my consulting work, for example, and maybe this is where it relates to psychotherapy, is I'm able to see people more in terms of um, this feeling of curiosity where, conversations might have triggered me in the past where I felt like, you're not listening to me, that you're not
Mm.
seeing what I'm telling you. Like, what do I have to prove to you that you will listen? Right? That was how I would approach it in the past. But I think a lot of it was because of my baggage and coloring, because, I always felt like I had to prove myself enough that I could get someone to listen to me. Whereas now, when I don't come at it with that feeling, it's more that you're not listening to me because there's something that's preventing you from listening. And that comes from whatever their own baggage is, that,
Mm.
it helps me approach it with curiosity. And, as I've gotten to know some of my colleagues at work in various consulting roles, I start to notice sort of what are their insecurities. And not because I'm trying to pick it apart, it's mostly because it's with genuine curiosity, wanting to get to know them as people. And because you get to know them, I'm able to approach the whole point differently. I'm not so upset, or, I think there was always this feeling where if I'm not being heard, I'm just more animated in trying to explain something to them.
Mm.
But sometimes it's more like stepping back and saying, okay, I can hear that you don't want to do this. I can hear the discomfort with this. And maybe it comes from a place of this or that, but it's okay. Um, it's my approach is different. I guess the biggest difference is how I show up.
And now I think it will be really nice for the audience to backtrack a little bit to state the CV story, just because that matters too. But then also to see how is now that how is that informing you now in your consulting work, and what are the some of the main important messages that you would want people to know about building a business, creating a business, and leading a business?
Um, so I guess the in terms of the my background then, my background itself was in electrical engineering. So I studied electrical engineering at MIT, and my first startup was right out of our dorm rooms at MIT. And such an interesting learning experience. It was myself, being a woman, and with four co-founders who are all men.
Mm.
And we can talk about that more. That was my first lesson in terms of my going along with other people's decisions and feeling like, this doesn't seem right to me, but they seem so confident. And it seemed like they knew what they were doing. They had
Mm.
so much hubris. And so I thought, okay, they must know what they're doing. They say this is the right way to do it. I'll go with it. And then think to myself, doesn't sound right, but let's try this. But in any case, that first startup, our vision was revolutionizing wireless. This was back in 2000. And, my background there was I went into sales because nobody else wanted that role. So going from electrical engineering to doing sales, that was sort of my first foray into the business side. And then from there, I did more startups, then moved to larger companies, multinationals. The one consistent thing in my entire resume, I guess, is that I've never held two consecutive jobs, either in the same role or in the same industry. Like every single job I've taken has been in a different industry. And I think the thing I've learned from all of this is pattern matching. And there are two patterns that came out. So one is the pattern that I saw the same set of product diseases over and over. And I call them product diseases because, diseases are easy to catch. We don't blame someone for catching the flu.
Mm.
And so this concept of diseases helps us just talk openly about the kinds of mistakes that we make that are easy to make. And then how can we build world changing products while avoiding those diseases? And so, Radical Product Thinking, my first book, which was released in 2021, so that book is about how do we build world changing products while avoiding those product diseases.
Mm.
And now the second book that I'm working on is about why goals and targets backfire, why they don't work, and what actually works. And the thing that intrigued me most about talking to you on this podcast was just so much of the intersection of psychology and business that I've only come to appreciate in the last couple of years. And how, just I found our conversation fascinating. My listening to Esther Perel and realizing just how much there was to absorb from all of that, and how I've been applying just psychology even in work and how that's made me a better leader.
Mm. And I really, I will try to back up from my excitement in trying to ask several questions at the time. So I'll try to approach this gently. Um, but I really, what I, well, first thing I really liked is as I said, the variety, and also I think that's something that I see. I think in today's world, but I think in general is people's tentativeness to hire people who have no experience, but they hire for experience rather than an ability to learn, and an ability to problem solve. And coming from science, I'm always very um, puzzled by those decisions because it feels like that they would hire for someone who's obedient, not someone who can work on their own. And that maybe has its place, depends on what kind of company we're building. But I feel I would like to work for companies which have a more of a different attitude. So that's maybe the first thing I want to ask you. Um, about this, your experience and how much you know how easy it is to shift, or easy in some places and harder in some others. It is to shift once you have this stable way of learning how to look at problems and patterns. Um, but I don't feel like that's recognized in different industries. So I'll stop here and then we'll unpack further.
Oh, so much to talk about there. I love what you said about people hiring for obedience. This
Mm.
has been such a theme in my entire career. That first CEO who didn't like me much, it was because I really didn't agree with his approach. And I cannot hide that. I think this has been another thing in my career. You asked me about, what about embracing myself, the authenticity. For a long time in my career, I would look at other people who are able to be so even keel, and I would envy them. I felt like, I just wish I could be like that. That, you don't show exactly where you stand. You could play poker and win. Like, you would know exactly what cards I have if I'm playing poker. Um, and so going back to the CEO, he called me gentle and tenacious, and he didn't like me because I am not an obedient employee. I am not one who is able to listen to someone's bullshit and go along with it. And it frustrates me to no end. But you're right, I never associated this hiring for obedience with hiring for subject matter expertise. I
Mhm.
think when you hire someone for subject matter expertise, under the guise of subject matter expertise, what you're really hiring for is someone who thinks like you. And um, the assumption is that they know the market and see the market in the same way, so they're not going to challenge you in these different ways. What happens when you don't know an industry is you come in, and then as you're discovering things about that market, about those customers you're talking to, etc., you question things. And if you're smart, you ask the right questions. And what I've observed in the last few years, especially as I become more confident, is I'm not afraid to ask really stupid questions, or, really basic questions is the right word. Because what happens is then people say, we actually don't know the answer to that. But that's a really hard thing to say in business. Like, why is someone doing this? Because, well, this is what they're trying to achieve. And then you ask the next why. Well, why are they trying to do that? And, you get to a point where people are like, no, I don't know why. But that is really uncomfortable. Someone coming in with subject matter expertise doesn't necessarily ask those questions. But I had never made that connection with hiring for obedience. This has been a pattern I've seen all along in my career, and which is why in 2017 I decided like I was done with the corporate world and I had to do freelancing. Add this to ADHD, where, having an ADHD brain, like this whole thing of someone telling you this is the method, it just doesn't sit right. Like you sort of have to find your own truth.
Mhm.
And this is um, this is very much something where I've realized that, someone saying this is how we do it in this business just never sat right by me.
Hmm. And actually, that there, I think there is an important point about which stage businesses are in, and I think sometimes subject matter expertise is really important. If the if the business is to keep stabilized, but I think it's important to recognize that mm, that the business cannot um, go with the times if there are no people who are ready to shake things a little bit. And one thing that I know in from my therapy practice and from my training is that people often conflate uncomfortable with unsafe. And
Mm,
we haven't been taught how to sit with uncomfortable feelings and not and know that that's not end of our lives and unsafety and complete trigger. And I think that's where I feel a lot of businesses are lacking is creating an environment where being uncomfortable and not knowing for long enough is okay because people know that the answer will emerge because they have a history of building that trust in themselves and in the process. So I'm wondering, how is it now that you're working with people? How do you practice and model maybe sitting with those uncomfortable unknowings? And I think if we want to build something new and visionary and helpful, we cannot do it in old ways.
mm. Yeah, I love what you said. And I want to rewind to one thing you said, which is, you do need subject matter expertise in certain situations. And this is not to downplay that. One example right now is, just even if you look at politics, very often when the president hires people who are not capable but or don't have any expertise, that is a really unfortunate thing to do. There was one company I was working at in the media and entertainment space, and the this was a case where the leadership team, they weren't thinking outside the box. They weren't thinking about how the market was shifting. But here's the problem. The board decided to fire the leadership team, bring in a new leadership team who knew nothing about the business. And the whole company tanked very quickly because the new people who came in didn't understand the business, and their formula for making everything better was, just the traditional, you lower costs, charge higher prices, and let's just do exactly what all books would prescribe. And that did not work. You do need that subject matter expertise to really understand what will work in that market. And sometimes when you're in a time crunch, especially, getting someone new to ask those questions doesn't work. Like if you're replacing an entire leadership team, that's definitely a discontinuity in terms of market expertise. Um,
And sorry, and also I want
yeah,
to add that from the language I have is you cannot shock a person into change. I
yes.
think a shock a person or an organization. I think change, if done well, is a place where new and old mix,
Mhm.
so that the old things keep the stability, but the new things can be slowly explored. And I think when change comes from those shocking moments,
Mm.
it can be important and groundbreaking and awakening, but if that's happening all the time and if that is the business model, then it's not viable for a long time.
Mm. So true. And then you asked about uncomfortable and how do you make people comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Hmm.
So one thing that I've been talking about is, if you look at the whole mindset of goal setting,
Hmm.
all of goal setting creates anxiety. So this is something that I've tested in workshops with people and in talks, and we already did this when you and I met first. But let's do this for our listeners. Here's the test that I do in my workshops. Just think about your feelings when I ask two questions. So the first question is, what goals do you want to achieve for your company this year? Just think about your feelings after that. And the second question is, what puzzles do you want to solve for your company this year? And your feelings about solving puzzles. And maybe there's something you want to talk to instead of me sort
I
of,
wanna share, yeah,
yeah.
I wanna share what I experienced. I can see when you asked the question about goals, what happened for me is I started frowning and kind of go entering into that kind of like let's kind of tensely focus on this. And once you said what puzzles you want to solve for your company this year, I've noticed it's a completely different part of my body that's being awakened. It's the excitement, it's my chest, it's kind of more of a curious embodiment, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. And this to me is the biggest shift, right? Like where goal setting creates anxiety. We don't ask questions when we set goals. Like we aren't curious. It's more this anxiety and closing down. Goal setting comes from a place of knowing. I know that this is the problem. I know this is the solution. And if you just achieve XYZ, then this is progress. Whereas puzzles create this feeling of, you can't possibly know the answers to a puzzle. If you knew all the answers, then it wouldn't be a puzzle at all. And so when I talk about puzzle setting and then puzzle setting is about saying, here's the problem statement. And, I'll give an example from a company that I've been working with. So the problem statement is only tech savvy people are using our product. Then the next question are the open questions, the set of open questions around this problem statement. How might I explore this? So, why is it that only tech savvy people are using this? How do the tech averse people behave in their roles? How do they get their jobs done? How are they thinking? What are their mental models? How do they work actually? And these are things we honestly didn't know the answers to. This is an uncomfortable space. And I was talking to a leader who works at Adidas when she started using this puzzle setting approach. She sat with her team and they talked about these open questions. And there was a reaction from the team where the team was like, shouldn't you know the answers to this?
Ah.
Like, even the whole team felt like, but wait, you should know. It's this fear of the uncomfortable, exactly like you're saying, like, it's not safe to not know. And she had to say to her team, no, guys, we're going to figure this out together. I can't know the answers to this either. And so being able to create that safe space for your team. And the last thing that you asked me was, how do you create that safe space? And this is one thing that I wanted to share, that as a leader, this is our responsibility. How are we going to be the witness for people's learning? What is the presence that we bring to create that space? And one experience that I've had when I was growing up, like this is a memory from, when I was really young, no more than elementary school, right? But it really stuck with me. I was flying on a plane, and it was the first time I was not sitting next to my parents. And there was a meal served, and just how on airplanes when they serve meals there's so much packaging, etc. Like if you're a little kid, you don't know what to do with this packaging. It's really hard to handle and maneuver that, right? And so there was this girl who was just a few years older than me sitting next to me, and she saw me struggling with this, right? And she was sort of this really nice presence who helped me with that. And then she showed me how she was taking some of those things and, packing it away for me. But she created the space for me where, first time I was doing this and I was learning, right? And it's not difficult. I was a smart kid. I could figure this out. But this memory really stayed with me that she was a witness for my learning who created this safe space. And I was thinking about how, as leaders, right, our teams are constantly solving puzzles. And we have to create the safe space where it's not even about embracing failure. Like I was thinking about how, in the business world, first of all, we set goals and then we create all these artificial mantras like you have to embrace failure, fail fast, learn fast. And it's such bullshit, right? Because think about when you're solving a Rubik's Cube, you don't try your first attempt and go like, oh, that was a failure, but I'm going to embrace failure. Like you don't even think in those terms. You just try something and you go like, oh yeah, what did I learn from that? And then like you just do that so intuitively. You don't even think of the words failure. And so imagine doing that puzzle in front of someone. Just what kind of a presence do you need from someone to be able to solve that puzzle? And similarly, what presence will you bring to your team so that they can solve that puzzle in front of you?
Hmm. I love that. And that's the being and leading.
Yes.
Hmm. I really love this. And actually I think there is one thing that you said that really stuck with me, which is I was a smart thing doing a hard thing. A smart kid doing a hard thing. And I think it's that trust in the people we work with that brings the presence. Because imagine if a leader is standing next to someone with the belief of like, oh my God, this guy could never do it, but like I'm paying him, so he better. It's a completely different presence than sitting next to one and saying, I know this is a really smart person who is struggling, um, and I'm going to just stay there while I can see that they're in this struggle and support them to 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 um bring the best out of them, no matter how far they bring the puzzle, because sometimes even with our own puzzles we know that some puzzles we just bring them to a certain point and then we stop. And actually, I wanted to add something here. Presence puzzle. um I lost the thought, and it always comes like 30 seconds later once I continue speaking, so that will happen. um but say.
Uh, I love what you said. And, this is something that has struck me for a long time in my career. This mindset that we often have as leaders, that our team isn't necessarily motivated, that we have to bring that motivation, that they aren't capable, I have to make them capable.
Hmm.
It's this, let's look at even goal setting and all of the books written about goal setting, etc. The terminology is always you have to set goals to motivate your team. And I've always wondered for myself, why do you think goals are going to be the thing that motivates me? Like, why don't you assume that I am so motivated? Like, you can see the passion in me. Why are you setting that goal? Like, if anything, that's demotivating me. It's just a fascinating mindset. Like, why have we always thought this, that we need to create this artificial external motivation? And because we have that sort of presence, you're exactly right that we make it hard for people to fail in front of us because we assume everything negative about the team. And, every time I've pointed this out to leaders, they go like, well, what you're talking about is a handful of people who really are motivated, but the rest are not. And there was one leader I was talking to, she goes like, 20% of people are pulling 80% of the weight in the company. And I always think to myself, like, why do you feel like that is the innate nature of people? There's so much motivation that I see in people. It's that each person has different levels of knowledge, skills, and experience. And the big question to me is, how are you going to harness that knowledge, skills, and experience from each person?
Mm.
And coming at it from this angle of they're not motivated enough or capable enough, you've lost the battle before you've even started.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I remember the sentence. There is a sentence from a gestalt therapist who says that people need only as much as support as necessary, but as little as possible, because
Mm.
there is that moment, sweet spot of allowing someone to have the frustration of trying something new, but then not giving them off too much of the solutions so that they don't build their own muscle. And I
Mhm.
feel there is a polarity there in terms of leadership. One polarity is a leader who would overly step into the person's role, and then they're saying, "Oh, I'm pulling everything here, no one works except me," but they are actually not able to really allow and back off and allow people to fail in their own terms and learn from that and grow from that. And then there's the other extreme, which they don't offer any support. And then they're wondering, well, why is this person not not performing? And I think there's, I don't know who said this, but I've read somewhere that you should treat everyone the same by treating them differently.
Mm.
Because in that sense, it's somehow what you just said, that the fact that um, people are different and will have different motivations and therefore will need different approaches to get them motivated. So I'm wondering, um, what is it in terms of myths about leadership in your work? What is it that you are mostly encountering, that you see that there are blind spots that are constantly perpetuated in the narrative around leadership and corporate world?
I think the biggest thing is this idea that leaders know and leaders set the strategy and everyone is following.
Mm.
Everyone else is in execution mode. That's the first thing. And there's the second thing, which is very related to what you're talking about, uh, which is, how much handholding do you give versus backing off? There's this thing that all leadership books say that, you scale as a leader when you delegate and you're encouraged to delegate, right? But nobody really teaches you how do you delegate well. And this is something people find out by trial and error. One thing that I've learned is the scaffolding needed for delegation. So I've talked about puzzle setting, and this is where puzzle solving comes in. And then we'll go back to the earlier part of what I was saying about leadership. But let's talk about this puzzle setting and puzzle solving and the scaffolding first in terms of delegation. And so, in terms of puzzle solving, there are three questions to solve a puzzle, right? So we talked about this Rubik's Cube, and you try your attempt. So you can give the team this scaffolding. And the scaffolding is there are three questions. The first question is, how well did it work? So, whatever your attempt was, how well did it work? The second question is, what did you learn? And this is where I say, don't just give me dashboards full of data. You look at the data and tell me the story, tell me the narrative of what's going on.
Mm.
And then the third question, based on how well it worked and what you learned, if I gave you a magic wand, what would you ask for next? What would you try next? And that magic wand part, right, is because I want you to just think out of the box. Don't just think of the next optimization. We can scale down from there. But first answer for me, if I gave you a magic wand, what would you ask for?
Mm.
And so these three questions really help you understand how good is someone at problem solving. So when you ask this question of, how well did it work? They've tried something, they reflect on that. What did you learn? This truly is the big telling sign for me. When someone gives me information just in terms of dashboard, my first instinct is, you think that all I want to hear from you is the data and that I will then analyze the data. But no, keep going with this, like take ownership of it, and tell me what you're seeing. And then, they'll come back and they'll tell me, what the data is actually telling them. They'll tell me the story. And that in itself sort of triggers the creative problem solving. It triggers the right brain, just, having them tell me the narrative. And then that last question of what will you try next? Again, it triggers more ownership of doing something, right? And then this creates more of the sense in me in terms of how are you thinking about this problem solving? And now I know how much I can delegate to this person. I can, first of all, develop their skills as I see the real answers to what they've learned and what they'll try next. And the second piece of this is I'm also course correcting so that for someone who could use a lot of delegation from me, I now know how hands off I can be. And for someone with less skills, knowledge, experience, I'm going to be a little more hands on. And now going back to that first part of leaders coming from a place of knowing, you know, instead of coming from a place of knowing, which really demotivates people like me who have passion, who care about the quality of their work, who want to bring that creativity to their work, if I'm new to the business, I have different level of skill, knowledge, and experience. Give me adequate handholding, but just enough to your point. Anything more than what is enough makes me feel like you're not trusting me.
Mhm.
And and so now you finally have the scaffolding for how do you give people just enough.
Hmm. And actually, I think there's what you've just said, I think is really important. And I've reflected a lot on this, given we've talked about gifted people, and gifted people are actually people with special needs in a, but in a different edge of the norm.
Mhm.
And I feel like they are actually really mostly missed by the system. And because there is no adequate training to understand what do I do with a person who is self-motivated, who is
Mm.
extremely passionate, who is really curious, uh, and they still need support, but different than what people might think. And actually, I think quite a lot of potential is lost by mistreating people who have these abilities to think outside of the box, to not follow the rules in the best possible way, not negligently not following the rules, but from really deep understanding of the rules. Um, and I think I would like to hear, how do you think of them, think of that process, and support leaders to cultivate these people?
Mm, this is such an interesting point. And, it made me notice something I said earlier, which is I was saying, with my ADHD brain, it's really hard for me to just accept
Mm.
someone's truth as opposed to find it for myself. It's not just the ADHD part, it's definitely also the gifted part. Like, if it doesn't
Mhm.
sit right by me and I cannot get someone to think for me, like this, I'm not going to be the one to implement your solution if I don't believe in it. And I have to be able to add, what I think, like if I can see 7 steps ahead and you want me to not do that, it is very hard for me to sort of hold back. It's like holding back a sneeze,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just so frustrating when all of your work every single day, it's like holding back a sneeze all the time. This is how I experienced work, I think, for the longest amount of time. Um, in terms of your analysis that work doesn't cater to gifted people, I think that is so true. Um, I think it also doesn't cater to the fact that, when you feel like you're holding back a sneeze all the time, that these people need an outlet. You're never giving this outlet for questioning things and disobedience. But there are two extremes that I've seen of this outlet and being able to question things. One is the Silicon Valley mentality, which is I have so much hubris, I'm not going to look at even defining the problem statement. I just have so much hubris that I'm like, I want to disrupt. And yeah, let's disrupt news without thinking about the consequences of disrupting news. That, just let's talk about news for a moment and disrupting news. Like when you disrupt news and news as a business model, research has shown that in OECD countries that fund public media, that there's less polarization. And then you disrupt news and create an ad-based news system that is all about incentivizing eyeballs, clickbaits, etc. And now you understand, why you get so much polarization. It is because the media contributes to it. Um, but going back to this mindset, we have to disrupt, but not without, but not in this careless way. We have to be very thoughtful and be genuinely curious and ask questions, um, and be disruptive but guided in how we're doing that, right? Like it has to be a culture not just of hubris but thoughtfulness. And I think that is something that leaders can really help harness. How do you bring about this culture where really smart people have outlets with you, creating safe space for them to be able to question things? One thing to know as a leader is that when you're questioning things, or when a gifted person on your team, when a high performer is questioning things, know that it's really hard for them to be in that position. It's a really vulnerable space because they're going to get shit from all of their colleagues because in questioning these things, they might be creating work for their team. I remember like at one company, I I created this whole presentation in terms of strategy about, the integration that I felt we needed across different products. And I presented this to management saying, why aren't we doing this? I don't understand. And, there were some colleagues for whom this created work. They were like, oh shit. And they sort of spun up a lot of this work to counter what I'd presented to say, let's not do this because otherwise it was a lot of work for them. But know that it's a really tough position that someone is putting themselves in. And sometimes if you're not guiding them, it's going to come out in two ways. One, come out in ways that is not even beneficial for them in terms of their career. And two, come out in ways where it's just going to create organizational sort of discord, etc. Like, how do you harness the power of these people? I think that's something that leaders can think about.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I think I really like that even the disruptive the idea about disruption needs questioning. It's almost like the importance is not to take things at a face value, but really allowing ourselves time and not always working on something as if it's a crisis. And
Mm.
I find that a lot of companies um, approach life and everything as if it's a constant crisis state, which is not, well, for some people, I have to say, depends on your context. It might be. We all live in different contexts. But I think it's so important to remember that not everything is a crisis. And then if not everything is a crisis, really taking a breath and allowing oneself to say, well, there's time. Let's let's take that time to really think about. And I really feel that developed countries that have the resources and the energy have more responsibility as well to be like, I'm not just going to disrupt, and just launch money into things without taking the time to think, because there's no real threat. Like I am at this edge, forefront, however you want to call it. So I wonder, how do you work with that sense of this needs to be done and needs to be done fast?
Mm. Oh, there was one company I was talking to, and they said to me, we don't have time for strategy. This is all so urgent. I was really amused by that. This was like maybe 15 years ago, but it just never left me, this quote. But I want to share just how important what you said is, because I see this happening in the US, especially all the time. Um, this idea that we're constantly in a crisis and therefore it is excusable to not reflect. Let's take the example of OpenAI. There was an interview of Sam Altman, the CEO, a year after ChatGPT was released. And the New York Times asked him, so, what are your reflections a year afterwards? And his answer to me was unbelievable. He said, oh, it's been such a busy year. I really haven't had the time to reflect. And I was thinking to myself, oh my God, you're one of the most powerful people in the whole world right now because of what you have created. And you aren't taking the time to reflect. And it gets worse, right? One way that we don't reflect, we think we know the answers, and then we impose this mentality on the team is then through goals and targets. Because uh, let's look at what has happened since. So in April this year, so in 2025, in April, ChatGPT launched their 4.0 version and or GPT 4.0. And that particular version that they released was the one that they tested, and it was rating higher for user engagement. And so even though their internal people said the vibe feels off and that this is more sycophantic, they still released it
Can
because
you
it
also
was
just
testing
say
higher.
for the audience what sycophantic means?
That this AI is constantly giving you validation, like, oh, yeah, you're right. Oh, great point. All this sort of constant reinforcement of everything and validation of you, always agreeing with you and being agreeable. So that's sycophantic. And so they released this version that was particularly so. And so, what has been observed since April is that the more AI is so agreeable, the more emotional distress it's causing people. New York Times has been tracking that there have been 9 hospitalizations since April, 2 deaths related to ChatGPT.
Mm.
And what is fascinating for me is that although, New York Times found this anecdotally, but also MIT's research is showing that sycophantic AI is problematic and is causing emotional distress, OpenAI and Sam Altman, they've decided that they're going to give users control over the dial of saying what personality that they want in their AI, how much agreeability versus, not being so agreeable, that users get to pick that. And there was, although they did create a version of ChatGPT that is now safer, but they're giving users the dial. And their chief product officer said in a memo to the whole company that the newer version that was safer was not producing enough in terms of user engagement. It wasn't connecting enough with users, and reminding everyone that their goal at the end of the year is to increase user engagement by 5%. That to me is a downright scary way of how we lead. That one, we haven't reflected on what we are doing to society through our creation, and two, that we're using goals to make our teams not reflect and build things that achieve goals but are not necessarily good for the long term.
Mm. And actually, this is where I think we can talk about metrics, because I think the problem with metrics is that we choose the ones that are showing growth, but we don't choose the ones that are showing impact. And I think this is the problem when we look at things one-dimensionally and look at metrics simply as are my users engaged or not. Uh, and 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 I think there is still this deep-rooted belief that if we only look at engagement, that's the only thing that shows how profitable good this company is. And I don't, and I feel like there's, I think my therapist friend once told me, Alex, I feel like you have this deep-rooted belief that only if you somehow do something wrong or cheat, you will succeed. And I feel like it's not mine. I feel like it's kind of coming from the field that only if you do the thing that doesn't feel right, we will able to create something which is profitable, which I really don't believe is the case. And I imagine you can also give examples of companies who work in this other way. But I think there is something about the metrics we look at that we need to reconsider when it comes to measuring a success of something. Because it's if it's I was speaking of my own success, and at one point I was teary and I said, I feel like I called this success, but actually I failed my health. And I think these are things that I think we are not considering. What is our success failing in terms of environment, in terms of, as you just said, not user engagement, but the way we use it and how it impacts the users. And I think those are the things that I don't know really how, but I think we need to have more conversations about.
Yeah, again, so much to unpack in what you said. Like, let's look at OpenAI, right? When they set goals like this of increased user engagement by 5%, it's goals and OKRs, targets, etc. They're all used as a way to define the impact that they want to have. And that's because these companies don't really think about what is the impact. They don't define what is the impact we want to have. They don't define what is the problem we are really setting out to solve in the world. What does the end state look like? Let's look at Facebook's vision statement, right? Facebook's vision was to create a world that's open and connected. And you say, okay, what does an open and connected world look like exactly? Like, how does that work? What happens in such a world in terms of privacy? Like, there is nothing that vision statement answers for me. It's a bullshit vision statement. But we've learned from such vision statements, and this is what we are taught, that you write vision statements like this that are broad, aspirational, but honestly, they're completely meaningless. So, one of the things that I talk about in the Radical Product Thinking book is and this is radical because I don't talk about vision statements like this. This is not, we don't write bullshit visions like revolutionizing wireless or democratizing justice that is meaningless. A good vision statement is not even about you. It is a problem statement that you want to see solved in the world, where you are very clearly addressing whose problem are you solving? What exactly is their problem? Why does it need solving? Because maybe it doesn't. Maybe the world is just fine the way it is. This is where, we talked about disruption, but disrupt with purpose. Maybe the world is just fine the way it is. And if it's not, then you have to be able to say exactly what is wrong and why the status quo is unacceptable. Then you can say, what is the end state that you envision? Not bullshit open and connected, but what does it actually look like, right? When the problem is solved, when can you say mission accomplished? And then finally, after answering all of this, you've earned the right to talk about your product. The final part of this is I'm bringing about this world through, and this is where you get to talk about this product. And in the Radical Product Thinking book, I write this as a fill in the blanks statement so that you're not in love with your own words, that you can answer this dispassionately. And 6 months from now, you might look at this. Maybe even a month from now, you can look at this and say, oh, I learned so much. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is what I need to change. So, first of all, I think we need that level of clarity. And without that, we have no business trying to create impact in the world. And when we don't have that level of clarity, then we have goals and targets, which is like putting duct tape on foundational cracks and saying, this is what I want to achieve. And this is what leads to this short-termism and thinking about, just optimizing for metrics, but creating long-term changes and then claiming, oh, whoops, those are unintended consequences.
And that's the thing where I feel like, um, are they on? Is it possible that people cannot envision them? Because I feel like if I can or you can, I imagine people who are smart enough to build OpenAI chatbot are able to see what's happening. And so I'm wondering because the problem is, I think the places where we see a lack of rigor and a lack of forward thinking and kind of not really caring about consequences are examples, and unfortunately, they are taken as example of success. And so I
Mm.
wonder, who is there are there for you examples of success that actually has all these elements that you're describing? Because I think people often tend to think of this as success because they haven't been shown anything differently. There are no
Mm.
models. And it's almost like the models we had for love until new shows and new series have kind of come up, then now we're suddenly having many different models of love. So I wonder, how can we yeah, just create a new playing field of models for people running their businesses.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did in radical product thinking was deliberately, I did not write about just Silicon Valley examples because I'm so tired of those examples that show the same models that just are extractive. So here's a very different example of an organization that took a very different approach and it has created meaningful impact. So the organization is called Lidjat. And so if you don't know the brand already, they're the company that makes that has um, huge market share in papadums. So papadums, for our listeners who might not know, they're the lentil crackers you get in Indian restaurants. And the Lijat has more than 60% market share, and the rest is fragmented across a ton of different small competitors. And ever since, I was little, I've known the Lijat brand. And at home, for example, you knew the Lijat brand was consistent with good quality, that you could always rely on buying that and it would be good papadums. So, it was only when I was writing the Radical Product Thinking book that I learned about the Lijat story. So the story is in 1959, it was started by 7 women who all were in low income families or low income backgrounds. And their reason for starting this was that they didn't have an education. They wanted to be able to contribute to household income and to be able to influence spending, right? Because otherwise, they weren't able to send their kids to school, and so they were just cycling this cycle of poverty. And so these women got together. It was 7 women on the roof of their terrace. And the only skill that they had was cooking because they didn't have an education, so they couldn't go get a job. And so they decided to make papadums, which are really hard to make, by the way. So my grandmother, for example, knew how to make papadums, but not my mom. And so they made papadums, they sold them to stores, and the store owners, it turned out to be a huge success. So they asked for more orders. And so, soon these 7 women became 25, that then became 300. But one thing that was interesting in their model from day one was that they said, we want to do this not as a charity, but as a way of earning a dignified income. So we will never, ever take charity. And 2, the women said, we are all going to be equal partners. So as they became 25 women, 300, as they didn't even fit on their building's terrace anymore, they always made every new woman an equal partner in the business. Today, Legit has 45,000 member sisters who've been able to educate their kids and create a meaningful impact for their family. Um, since Lidjat is now bigger, they have now been able to create educational programs for those women because now that they've educated their kids, those same women wanted to have that education so that they could feel like equals with their kids. And so now Lidjat, there's 45,000 women. They still have the same business model. And the way it works is they all share in profits equally. And then you wonder, like, wait a minute, how did they even create this thing where They share in profits equally because, I might roll more papadums than you do. How do we share papadums or how do we share profits equally? So basically, they have a minimum cutoff that as long as you roll more than 5 kilos of papadums a day, then you share profits equally.
Mm,
And what is amazing is that they created this mindset. It's a pledge that they sign that, we're not going to think about individual gains. We're all signing up to think about collective gains. And so we're not going to squabble over this because you can never imagine lawyers in a firm, despite seniority, sharing profits equally, right? But this is a pledge that they sign and they have to really feel like it. And if you hear these women talking about Lijat, they almost talk about it like it's a temple or it's a place of worship because this has given them so much. So here's an example of creating a meaningful difference. If you ask any of the Lijat member sisters, they don't describe a bullshit vision about, being the leader in papadums or something like that. They will describe what they were founded on, and what is the change that they want to bring. And it's creating these high quality papadums, and they care about their output because they care about creating a dignified living.
mm. You're reminding me, there's this movie, I think it's the trilogy Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, before Sundown, I think. But in one of them, I won't quote it perfectly, but I'll show you after we finish. But there is something around saying that people describe leadership and success as these bold visions, but actually it's those people who are packing pencils to deliver to schools that are actually creating meaningful change.
Mm,
And that really stuck with me from then. It's really how do because it's this hierarchical model where I get from more from paying you less, not really
mm,
never sat well with me. And it's a really touching story. Thanks for sharing it. And I really, and again, I think we're coming back also to what you've said. Maybe it's not a coincidence that's a story of 7 women. And I think in that terms, not that I say, I think the unfortunate thing for men is that again, their models have been crooked from the very beginning, and even the ones that really want to make a difference, they almost feel like I can never make it because like
mm,
only the guys who are like this and that can make it.
mm.
So I really think that we're not going to change things um, by talking about this, but really by showing examples of really of change makers who have done it in a way that doesn't have to be extractivist. And so this it really it was very gentle and so resonated with me. And I wonder, given this story and the people you work with, what is it that you can see that really supports that level of genuineness and authenticity in thinking and creating businesses?
Um, Tell me more about, I'm not sure I fully
So
understood.
what is it that, for a person who is having ideas about creating a business, what is it
Mm,
you know, what is it that would support them to do it, and also in addition to trust that that will be possible in a way that doesn't need to compromise their integrity and who they are.
wow. This is a tough question. And I'll answer this honestly, but this is not one where I feel like I'm painting a rosy picture. If the question is about starting a business, right, I feel like the landscape there is more challenging in terms of being um, being true to yourself, your values, etc. It's in a if you're looking for VC funded sort of I want to go big sort of startup, right? Because I think if you look at the funding landscape, etc., it's dominated by the kind of people who are trying to do pattern matching and find people who are the careless, thoughtless people of Silicon Valley very often, who are disrupting for the sake of it. So I think that route, unfortunately, um, breeds more of the same. That's been my observation. But I think here's a different angle. I think, there is room um, for thinking about, how do you want to contribute to business in a way that is true to your values? I think that to me is the big question. And the one thing that I'll say is, for me, the realization over time has been that we vote with our labor for the world that we want to create.
Mm.
That if you don't reflect, how can you possibly cast the right vote? And so one thing that I've found is, there was a point where I was just working away at a company and I was pursuing sort of my career goals, etc. But in chasing all of those things and in being busy all the time, I didn't really have time to reflect and to ask myself, what is it that fulfills me, that I want to do? I didn't have time to think really about what is the vote that I'm casting in the world. And I think that is maybe what the first step in terms of what we can do differently, to reflect and see what are even my values and how true am I being to them through my work. Part of it is through how we are being leaders, and how we are being present for people around us to be able to solve puzzles and learn, etc. But the second piece of this is where do I want to invest my time? What sorts of puzzles do I want to spend my time on? Are they puzzles that feel like a meaningful contribution to society? Or am I chasing something that is going to be that is, in a sense, chasing numbers and status for myself, but I'm not necessarily creating contribution to society that I will look back on and say I'm proud of. There was this friend of mine who once sent me this GIF of an old man on his deathbed saying, "My biggest regret is not having created more shareholder value." Not a thing. So I feel like our reflection has to be, what is it that we truly meaningfully want to do?
Hmm. And I think again coming back to what I hope these conversations are giving is hope that our values will find their way in the world. That it doesn't have to, we don't have to forsake them to find jobs. If and I believe that if we give, of course, come in different places for different reasons. People have to sometimes do things that they're not fully aligned with them. This is not to add just more salt to the wound, but but there are points, and I think especially in developed countries where we can rely on some of the beds that we made for ourselves and just take a moment to really reflect. Um, and there is that kind of ground that we can do that, and that's why I hope that these conversations like this can really support people in asking those important questions. And maybe we can just start with, what do you think are some of the questions that people need to ask themselves once they step back? Um, yeah.
I have a thought on that, right? And one framework that I use, and you can use this both for decision making at work, but even for yourself. Um, what you're constantly doing intuitively is you're balancing long term versus short term. All the way from when you were in college, most likely you were thinking about, am I going to study tonight or go out and party, long term versus short term? Like, this is constantly the balance. And so make that balance really explicit. So your y axis is this good for the vision or not? Right. And now that we've talked about a detailed vision statement about, what is the problem you want to solve in the world? Why does that need to be solved? What's the end state? How will you bring that about? Now you know how to write a detailed vision, and you can look at the Radical Product Thinking book on that. And the x-axis is the short term. It's survival. So maybe for you, it's financial survival for the company. But you can also look at this on a personal axis. Survival for you might be what's sustainable for you personally. And so the way the quadrants emerge, right, is what is good for the vision and survival. Those are easy decisions. And in business, you might often stick to easy decisions, but you have to know that if you're always sticking to easy decisions, you're never investing in the vision. So sometimes you have to do things that are good for the vision, but maybe not great for short term. So examples of this would be, if you're refactoring code, taking care of technical debt, maybe you are spending time in training. All of that is investing in the vision. In personal life, that might be that you decide to do a career switch. You decided you've just about had it with what you're doing. Investing in the vision is you have figured out what your long-term vision is. Maybe you have to go back to school. That's investing in the vision. The opposite of that is vision debt. When you're doing things for short-term survival, but it's not great for long-term vision. In the corporate world, that might be something like, you're taking on a custom feature because you're going to win a mega deal, but it's not great for the long-term vision. On the personal side, it might be that you're feeling like, I hate this job, but I have to stick with it for longer because that's my source of having uh, health insurance. And I just need to stick with this because the market is bad, but it's not great for my long-term vision. But there are two things that emerge once you start thinking about these four quadrants, right? And the last quadrant I didn't talk about, but I'll mention briefly, is the danger quadrant, where it's bad for the vision and bad for survival. You don't deliberately take things there, but it sort of ends up there accidentally. So I'll ignore that quadrant for a moment. But there are two patterns that emerge from this. The first thing is you'll see that, especially if you are really smart, passionate about your work, that there's a high overlap between vision debt for yourself and vision debt for the company, because it's what you're passionate about. And you will sense that vision debt that you're taking on for the company, and it feels also soul sucking for you personally. So you'll notice that if there's a lot in the vision debt quadrant, you're very frustrated at work, but also perhaps personally. The second thing that you might notice is the more vision debt you take on, if you're not thinking about it, if you're not reflecting, it becomes soul sucking, but you don't even have a handle on why is everything so frustrating and soul sucking. So taking some time just to reflect and think about where you're spending your time, even identifying that, it's like the spell is broken. You can see where you're spending time. Now you can either choose to do something about it, or you can say, you know what, I have to suck it up for the next few months and take this on. The one thing that I will say is, don't fall trapped to this learned helplessness. If you feel like I have to work on this and take on vision debt, don't feel like you have no choice all the time, right? You might feel like that temporarily, but keeping track of this vision debt is a way of saying to yourself, am I just giving in to learned helplessness? And I'll give you one example. There's a friend of mine who worked at Google for a really long time. And this person would say often how much they didn't agree with the company's values, how it was soul sucking for them. But they kept saying, you know what, I appreciate the paycheck, it pays me well, and I can't switch because I really need that. But they weren't really reflecting on, can they actually do something different? It's accepting that vision debt, accepting helplessness as a way of life. And that is something to maybe consider.
Mm. And I think that's where I feel having this concepts and frameworks is so important because it normalizes something for a moment. And you can say, "Oh, I know that now this is where I'm at. And I know that as frustrating as it might be, I still know where I'm heading."
Mm,
And I think these are the things that often, and I think that it's the part where reflection is so important, and we don't really talk about it often, and we almost like even if you think of the idea of just do it, um, we almost the opposite of normalize. We stigmatize the
mm,
idea of reflection because you won't be productive, you won't be
mm.
doing it, you will just be thinking, you will not take action. And if you don't take action, and I think there is this idea that action is the sole thing that leads us somewhere. And also there's again this thing that something needs to be built shortly, quickly, and so I think what this allows is to really allow ourselves to have our whole life as a vision, and as a place where we are potentially going. And along those ways, we will have so many things happening, such as life is, which are completely out of our control. But if we've reflected enough of what our vision is, it will be easier to take those hits and those step backs, because we know that might be a temporary move away from our vision and kind of coming back to it. And so I wonder, yeah, what I really like about your thinking is I feel like it's really informed by experience. And I think in that sense, not neglecting experience and not neglecting our mistakes and not being kind of frustrated with ourselves, like, oh, why did I do this and why did I make this? I wonder maybe if you could speak on something. What have you learned from all of those experiences for yourselves and for yourself, and how has that informed radical product thinking and the other books that you're planning to write?
Mm. Um, so first of all, the importance of reflection. There's a quote that came to mind, when you were talking about that. The quote goes, "We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience."
Mm,
And I find that so powerful. We learn from reflecting on experience, and yet we don't devote time to that. And one thing I will say is that I think reflecting on experience can be painful, which is why we avoid that so much. And this has been part of my experience too. This whole journey that I was mentioning earlier about unpacking just my own upbringing, embracing all of myself, until we can really embrace flaws and what we're good at, that reflection and reflecting on mistakes is really painful. Because all I could see, so for example, if I ran a workshop, all I could think about after running that workshop was not how much people loved it. All I could think about was, oh, I should have done this better, I should have done that better, etc. Right?
mm,
And I think this last October was the first time when I ran a workshop. And literally at 9 o'clock, the workshop was supposed to start, and the what do you call it? The over projector was not working. But I was not in a moment of panic. I was like, you know what, people, this is how it is. We're just going to sort of fly with it. And it was this whole embracing things, right? Like, it is just how it is. At the end of that workshop, it was the first time I was delivering that particular workshop. It was about puzzle setting, puzzle solving. And I was like, you know what? I learned so much from this whole experience, but I wasn't beating myself up about all those tiny mistakes. What stuck with me was sort of what resonated for people, also what didn't, but it felt so non-judgmental. It was the first time. So one thing that I'll say is that even this vision versus survival, being able to do this exercise in retrospect and thinking about initiatives or even mistakes, right? These are things that build this muscle for doing what you said earlier in the conversation, staying with the uncomfortable and getting comfortable that it's not the end of the world, that those mistakes are still okay, just being able to embrace all of yourself. But it also goes back to, I think, psychology and being able to embrace all of yourself. But I think that's the point, that if we can just take the time to reflect, be uncomfortable, that it leads to so much more progress. But
and
there was
I
something else that you mentioned that I didn't answer, but I can't remember. We kind of
I mean,
drifted.
if it comes back to you, I don't remember
Oh,
exactly. So
yes,
yes.
there was another thing. One thing that you said, about the vision and having that clarity of vision. What I want to share for our listeners is even just how you can use this vision statement for personal vision, and how having that clarity for yourself is helpful in terms of thinking about where you want to spend time. So I'll share my personal vision statement from maybe 7 years ago, and then kind of how it's changed in the last year or so. And I'm going to use this fill in the blank statement I talk about in the radical product thinking approach. So 7 years ago, when my kids were younger, this is how the vision went. So today, when my family, so meaning my husband and kids, want to have an emotional anchor and be able to process their emotions um, and share with me kind of all that's happening, they have to look to me or just look within themselves, and they're not always equipped. Um, this is unacceptable because unless I can create that space for them, that it's going to lead to needing years and years of therapy because I can't produce secure adults without that. Um, I envision a world where I'm able to be that emotional anchor in the family and um, produce that happy, loving family in an environment. And the way I'm going to bring this about is by taking on work that allows me to have that emotional bandwidth to be able to have Gandhi like patients at home.
Mm.
So that was my vision a few years ago, right? And even writing out this vision made it much easier for me in terms of thinking about what opportunities was I going to pursue and what opportunities was I going to say no to. And then in terms of how the vision has evolved now, so my daughter is now 19, my son is 16. I still am close to them emotionally, but it has shifted over time. So my vision now is more along the lines of, today when I want to show up in a more authentic way and feel like I can truly be myself, I have to unpack things for myself. Otherwise, I'm constantly triggered by various things happening around me. This is unacceptable because then I can't truly be myself if I am being triggered. Then I constantly have to get into this mode of having to prove something to the world, and I can't just let go. Um, I envision a world where I've really been able to take the time to reflect and unpack, um, to be able to embrace all of myself. And the way I'm doing that is now finally devoting the time and the mental space, both to be able to read the kinds of books that allow me to unpack this, but also working with a therapist to be able to do that. So, this is my vision at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I think as I was listening to you, what was coming for me is yeah, that the fluidity of our visions and allowing ourselves to again give ourselves the space and time to come back to what we've reflected on and what we set ourselves for, but also what you're just saying is modeling that we are all CEOs of our own lives, and we very often don't reflect that on the fact that we are. And we feel like we're just taken by the current. But actually, what you've just said shows that we can reflect on what's the vision for me, what's the vision for my family, and there are so many spaces where we do have a sort of agency which we don't really accept. And we can also create, I mean, I was teaching therapists, and I said to the therapist, but I think this can be applied to everyone. You need to have your personal um, board of directors, because basically those are the people that are your support to bring your vision to life in the best possible way. In this case, is your therapist, is your family, your friends, but are these people that are surrounding me really supporting me to bring the vision I have for this world and for my world into birth? And so I think it's always that life informs business, but business can also inform life. And I think it's so nice to I find it always very sad that women are taught to be entrepreneurial when they were organizing whole households without being given the title of an entrepreneur. So I think this is I think I find it amazing that that we have these frameworks that we can rely on in the moments where it just feels so murky and we don't really think we can do something about things. So I wonder, how has, being in business informed you about how you live, how you are in the world, and how you problem solve even at home.
um, I think so. There's one parenting book that I read that was life changing, and that was Parenting Without Power Struggles. And
Mm,
it's a book that it teaches you to ask four questions when your kids are misbehaving, right? And the first question, that's honestly the only question that really, really matters. The first question is, why should they be feeling exactly as they're feeling? So
mm,
it doesn't mean that they're right, but coming at it with empathy. Why should they be feeling exactly as they are? And I think this is where personal and professional all merge, right? Because even at work, we can ask ourselves this exact same question as a leader. Why should someone be feeling exactly as they are right now? And approaching it from that angle helps you problem solve so much better. So
mm.
I think that maybe that is one thing that has really shaped me. And I wish I had read that book when my kids were just born or even before that. But like that was just so meaningful and life changing. The second thing I'll say that I learned from in terms of experience was as a woman, it is so hard to ever be given good feedback in terms of your leadership skills in the sense that if you're too assertive then you're told, oh yeah, you're too sorry, not even too assertive. If you are assertive, period, then you're told, oh, you're just not getting consensus, you need to work on building more consensus, etc. And then if you are trying to get too much consensus, then of course it takes you so much longer to get something done than your male counterparts who just say, we're going to do this. And, everyone says, oh, yeah, okay. He says he's such a strong leader and everyone follows.
Yeah,
Right.
he's
And
such a
so,
great guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So one thing that I found was, all of these exercises that you're hearing, this fill in the blanks vision statement, the vision versus survival, these are tricks that I've learned where you can use this to create a more facilitative conversation at work so that, you know, even in the course of this podcast, you can tell that I have this assertive personality. Let it never be said that I don't have a vision. But, I'm not going to make it seem like this was my idea. We're going to write this vision. I'll, of course, have what I wrote in my back pocket. But, I'm going to invite what you think and invite that opinion. And I do mean this honestly, and I don't mean it in an inauthentic way, but it's a more facilitative way to get people to share their opinions. I do get a lot out of those conversations. But if ever I were the one as a woman just putting forward, this is my vision, it would not be well received as much as if it's a man doing that. Similarly, if I were to push back on a decision and say, we shouldn't be doing this, I would need a lot more justification. So, just my standing up and drawing a vision versus survival on a whiteboard where I say, I feel like this decision falls in this vision debt quadrant, and here's why. I'd love to hear your thoughts and kind of where are we misaligned? Is it that we don't agree on the short term survival, or are we not aligned on vision? Now it's forcing everyone to take a step back and think about what is the vision? What does survival mean? So these are facilitative things that I've learned in terms of leadership because of being a woman and because we're never ever given feedback like, yeah, great, you're so assertive.
Mm. And can I think it's so important to speak more to the gendered experience of being a leader,
Mm,
because I think it's easy to just say it's an equal playing field, and if you just do enough, you will get it, and it's
yeah.
really not. And I wonder what can one do about that? And what has been your experience that works best? I mean, you've explained some of it right now, um, but how can we challenge that in a way that still creates dialogue?
Mm. Uh, there are two things that I'm going to say. So, one is, I think, we really can be allies for other people. And I don't just think it's the matter of gender, it can be gender, color, whatever the difference is that is creating a bigger uh, threshold for someone to climb and having to prove themselves, right? So that we can be genuine allies. And what does it mean to be that? Um, I remember I was once on a LinkedIn thread where there were some women who were getting really just vitriolic comments from a certain guy on this thread. And, I wrote to someone on that thread saying, dude, you're on this thread. Can you respond and say something uh, to support one of these women? This isn't fair. And the guy never responded. Like, in our earlier threads, right? He was saying how he was so supportive of women and blah, blah, blah. But when it came down to action, he was not willing to speak up. And the same thing for like two other guys. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So, true allyship doesn't just mean lip service, it's actually doing something. And I'll give you a counterexample to this. One person who I've really appreciated, so his name is Bruce McCarthy. He is also a speaker, and, he was quoting me in a conference about my definition of what is a product. And your product is your mechanism for creating change in the world. So, whatever is your mechanism or to create that change, whether it's parenting, your freelance work, a research project, whatever it is your product to create that change. And he was quoting me on this definition. And what was really nice was that he put that quote along with my picture. And that made a huge difference to me because that conference organizer called me up and said, if someone in our conference is quoting you with your picture on it, we clearly want you to talk here too. And that meant a lot to me. This is what true allyship means, that you don't just talk about gender issues and, say, yeah, the world needs to be fairer. You can quote a woman and put her picture on it and make a meaningful difference. Um,
Mm.
that is one example. And the second piece of this that you brought up is, I think women often feel like if I were, so I've sometimes had more support from men than I have from women.
Mhm.
Uh, Rare, but I haven't had that many women who have sort of brought up other women. I hear this from other women too. And I think some of this is this view that it is a competition, that there isn't that much space at the top, or it's this feeling that I've earned my way to the top, and so I don't need to do that for anyone else.
Mhm.
And I think it is this mental shift that we really just need to make.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And actually, I think that's, I mean, if we think of the strategies of oppression, is that in order for people to feel that, there's someone better, in between them, there needs to be a division.
Mm,
And I think that also comes with gendered and internalized oppression. So I'm not surprised when, I mean, it took me quite a while. I really want to write this post. What are the things that I believed about women that have been a narrative that man has created? And I really took it in. And it takes really reflection. We are coming back to reflection, to a reflection and exposure to women and their leaderships and their skills to realize, oh my God, this is such bullshit. And one of them was that a woman leader is way too emotional.
mm,
And another one was one of those things when someone is attacked, it's like, well, why was she wearing that? Like, if you
mm,
know that you're going in a place like that, why are you not taking all the precautionary steps?
mm,
And all these things were really just narratives that, we are seeking for perfect victims and thinking that it's not going to happen to us if we are allies with the aggressor. So if I
mm.
befriend the person that's aggressive, they might not touch me, but they will touch all these other girls. And so I think that's something. I think it's also important for me to name how much I have had to work on that narrative,
Mm,
because then women can even maybe be less ashamed of the fact that they might still have some of those beliefs,
mm,
because they are created through thousands of years of
mm,
mind washing, if you
mm,
and
mm,
brainwashing, in terms of narrative. And I think it's really important that we admit our fallibility, and realize and saying, well, I was that woman, and I'm not now because I've read and I spoke and I exposed myself to other opinions. So I think it's also so important that we don't blame each other for
mm,
being like that, but
mm,
also taking accountability for naming when that's happening.
mm,
And also supporting. I was really grateful that, coming from a very patriarchal country, to get to know women who have been in more, in countries where at least the conversation is being had. Whether changes are implemented, that's debatable. But at least it has to start with awareness so that something can change. And I
mm,
think those women that have been somewhat elder or just exposed to something different, but kind of having the gentleness to hold me while I'm learning about that was so
mm,
important. So I
mm,
really am really glad that you've mentioned this, and it's such an important topic to speak, especially when it comes to leadership and harnessing the incredible talent that women hold.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also makes me think about just, okay, this has happened to me so often in the last, let's say 5 years, um, that now there are occasions where I'll catch myself having a thought and then go like, oh, wow, that was a very biased thought,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when we can admit that we have biases, then we open ourselves with curiosity to say, oh, wow, where did that thought come from? Like, and I'll tell you this bias, right? So, uh, just so I was driving and there was this white Tesla in front of me that was just being very erratic. And I was like, oh, I bet you that's, and I'm gonna, and I'll say this bias, and please know, like this, I feel bad about it, that, these are admissions, right? But like my instinct was, oh, that's going to be a woman and a woman driver, and it's going to be an Asian woman driver. And then, I heard myself say that. I was like, wait, no, that's, this is a stereotype and it's not fair, actually. And if you look at insurance data, it's actually the men who have bigger accidents. There may be minor accidents caused by women, but the bigger accidents are actually caused by men. And so, in any case, like catching ourselves, but to be able to catch ourselves is the only way we can deal with bias within us and show up in a better way as better leaders, right? And one thing that prevents us from catching such biases is where we say, oh, I'm not biased. Like, for instance, I have a friend who, this is one area of our friendship that is problematic, where sometimes he'll say, I'm not racist, but dot, dot, dot. Um, or I really support women, but are you sure that this experience you just had was because you're a woman? And that was the point where I had to say to him, don't ever question me on that, because this is my lived experience. Like, it really is painful when even you are gaslighting me and saying, are you sure this experience is because you're a woman? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think we have to come at it from a place of acknowledging our biases, knowing that we all have biases. It's just a matter of discovering what are your particular biases. And each of us have different biases because of where we grew up.
Yeah, and I think that's I think is the most important is we if we accept that the default state of every one of us is bias before we export exposed to something different, then it's not about shaming and blaming. It's just about conversing and being curious. Like, how am I
Mm,
biased? What am I doing to make this world a shittier place? Because I am
mm,
certainly doing something. And I
mm.
think I had this experience in my teaching group, which I found it was so small but so mind-blowing. We are sitting in a circle and we are sitting in this very crammed room. And that it's really not kind of optimized for that amount of people and things like that. And I was sitting on an edge, and people were saying that they were sitting close to a window, and they were kind of saying, "Oh, I really don't like this place. I need to do this." And I was kind of thinking, "Oh, it might is it really that bad?" And then I by chance, or not by chance, the next day, I came late, and everyone was already sitting in their places, and I was supposed to sit in that place where the other people were in the middle, close to the window, and it was really uncomfortable, and I was really pissed off, and it was super cold, and we're talking about one room, and every
Oh,
single
fascinating.
person has a different experience of that room.
Mm,
And who am I to decide whether the experience my colleague is having is true or not if I'm not sitting and literally
yes.
walking in their shoes? And I think, and we're speaking of a room. Imagine of a place where you've grew up in India and I grew up in Serbia, and you are a woman who has lived there and there, and someone is a man who has grew up in England, or it's like we really need to speak of context specific information.
And this point of bias and like this recognizing our biases, I was thinking about this in terms of AI and just our conversation earlier about ChatGPT. One of the biases that we have is even about just everyone else is thinks similarly or has a similar psychology to us, right? And I was thinking about how we were saying how AI just the interactions people are experiencing those interactions differently. Like you and I might experience those interactions with AI differently from other people. Um, where because of my engineering background and also feeling secure in myself, I'm actually irritated when AI is being constantly so sycophantic and like telling me, yeah, oh yeah, you're right. And then I tell it something else. Oh yeah, that's right too. Like just everything just annoys me more than anything. But someone else is looking for that validation and feels like this AI is really understanding them because maybe they haven't felt seen or understood by anyone in their lives. And thinking about biases and just our recognizing our own bias, like a lot of people who work on AI, they assume everyone else experiences AI that you've built in the same way that you experience it, which is such a bias in just what we're building, this neurotypical bias too, right? um, and if people are not experiencing it in the way you are, you might be creating consequences that are truly unimaginable for you at the moment. And the way we counter our biases is with openness and saying, I might be biased, and what don't I know? I need to learn that.
And that question is, what don't I know, and I think that's this whole I think the business thing of like we needing to know and have answers constantly prevents us. And I think I was thinking about that when you were speaking of numbers and data and what do we show. um, how unsupported is to go in front of your founders or in front of your VCs and say, look, guys, this is what the data is saying. I have no idea what it's saying, but I'm really willing to dig into this. Can we look at this together? Because we want this business to succeed, but I don't want to show you and bullshit you so that we both go into direction that doesn't really work. And I think And I wonder how can we slowly start to build. And that's something that I have in my therapy training. This has been so reparative
Mm,
because people are learned are taught and it's part of the culture to challenge each other and to
mm,
discuss really hard feelings and to know what are the processes that are happening in between humans and not to assume that they will not be happening between me because I'm so special. Like I'm not this just regular human. I don't do parallel process or I don't do transference or like, all this therapy talk. And I wonder how can we, what do you see if you have a vision of what do you want more in business? And how do you see maybe getting more of that based on all the experiences you are having as a consultant and you had before in your previous jobs?
mm. Um, I think, sorry, would you mind if you just have to edit out this part? Like, I was so interested in what you were saying. Like, I got lost in what the question is because I was still reflecting. Would you ask me the question one more time?
Yes, yeah, I mean, we don't need to edit. It's just, this is, I think, modeling to, we don't know. So, so basically the question is, if you are to, so what I was commenting on is modeling a new way of being together in business and in being able to challenge us as
Mm,
not this perfect version of untouchables that don't make mistakes, but being together in a way that we are really in this business together and we want to solve this, but not from a point where I show you the best of me and you show me the best of you.
mm,
So if you are to, think of what would you like to see more of in business? So this is my bias. This is what I would like to see more of. What would you
mm.
like to see more of in the way we do business in the future?
Yeah, one of the reasons I got lost in your what you were asking me was because I was still stuck on what you were saying about, I have this data and I feel like I need to dig into it, but I don't know what is going on. And I was thinking about how I cannot think of any company where you would be able to say that, let alone to your boss, not just, in a bigger group, right? And we do need to create space where it is okay to say that, like that. I only just got this and this data and I haven't yet figured it out, but like I see there's something here, I don't know what it is. It is so rare to be able to say that to anyone because even in the boss it creates this uncertainty. It's more like, well, if you don't know the answer to this yet, why are you telling me right now? Maybe I'm telling you this right now because I need more time. Let's put off our conversation or whatever it is. It always has to come with an ask or like to provide some sort of certainty, right? That here's what it means for you.
Mm-hmm.
But but honestly, like I realized that even in my conversations, like at home with my husband, if I'm telling a story, he's always listening from this angle of what is it that you want me to do? And or what does it mean for me? And so sometimes if I'm telling a story with a lot of tension in it, he goes like, "Can you just tell me, does it end well? Does it end badly?" I think this is what happens in business too. Like you just want to know, okay, so what does this mean? What do I have to do? I think from that perspective, right? Maybe one thing is even being able to communicate sort of your own mental models. Just knowing this about my husband has been helpful in terms of how I do communicate. I tell him, good news, you don't have to do anything, but here's the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of our shorthand now. It doesn't always work because there are times where I'm so excited by the story, I have to, go through the whole anecdote. But at work, I think there are two things we can do. One is do share what is your mental model and your way of working, maybe your biases or sort of what is the API or the right way for someone to communicate with you that would truly help you and sort of let your guard down and be at ease as well. That's one thing. But the second thing is one thing to never, ever, ever say to your team is come to me with solutions, not with problems.
Oh.
That is, but for people who don't know the story of NASA and why the Mars lander crashed the first time was because um, there were because of this view that come to me with solutions, not with problems, and people didn't know how to solve it, so they didn't share what the problem was. And so that is not useful. You really do want people to talk to you about what are the problems. And in fact, this puzzle solving approach that I talk about, how well did it work? What did we learn? What will we try next? You know, this enables you to come with the good and the bad. Talk about what is working, what is not working. Invite the good and the bad for your team. Don't ask them to come to you just with solutions. The what have you learned might be that this is a problem. I'm still figuring this out. And here's what I know so far. It may not be a whole lot, but I'm inviting you to add to my learning. And then what will we do next? Maybe this is the place where you're completely lost. You really don't know where next. It's okay. Like, create that space. Don't say, tell me solutions, not
No
problems.
problems. And I think maybe in a way that's I this whole conversation I for me, if it could be summed up in a sentence, it would be be comfortable, become comfortable with the unknown, and
Mhm.
allow that for yourself and also for the people you work with, because it sounds like the more we can do that, the more we can create something from a place of respect and curiosity rather than constantly back and forth of who can do this better. And the book you mentioned about parenting without power struggles, it's also leading without power struggles. Yeah,
So true. So
yeah,
true. And I guess maybe that's one way to wrap it up, too. That I think whether in personal life or in business, I think one of my learnings has been life is all the colors.
yeah.
It's not just the brights, not just the darks. And we sort of have to embrace all the colors. Sometimes we're looking for just the brights because we think they're prettier. But the reality is that the brights are only bright in contrast to the dark. And so, whether at work or, even in personal life, it's being open to all the colors. And that's what makes it all so much richer, whether at home or at work.
Mm-hmm. And with that wrapping up, I wonder, is there any question that I haven't asked, but you feel like you've been dying to speak about, or like you really wished someone would ask you, and you have that like answer in your pocket, but you haven't had the chance to take it out? This is your chance.
Well, maybe my hope for our listeners is that they listen to this and they go like, "Oh, when can you guys do this again?" Because this has been such a fun conversation. I would really love to do this again.
Yes, yeah, and I think there will be a part two. Yes. Well, we will leave it to the listeners to see if there is anything they want to hear more from us, because I think as a pair we can bring a lot of goodness from each other. So yeah.
I really loved this conversation.
So thank you so much. And is there's anything left you want to say and how you want to close, feel free to just say maybe some of the things that you would like people to know about you or find you or
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm working on my second book, as I shared. And so for listeners, if you want to use this puzzle setting, puzzle solving, you can download the toolkit and I'll send you a link to that so you can share in the share notes, in the show notes. And, as people use this puzzle setting, puzzle solving, I would love to hear about your experiences. Send me a ping on LinkedIn. I would love you to hear your experiences. And as I work on the book, maybe something can also make it into the book as a case study. But in either case, I'm just really curious to hear what people think. So please feel free to reach out.
Mm. Thank you again for reaching out for to me and for accepting this conversation. It was really joy.
Truly for me too. Thank you.